Sashi Jushine Tamri Raglishi Nidegen Pari Sageshindu Miteopa Gidrogunanda Shila Chopa Shoidam Guru Ratnamata
Sanji Chedan Tsojin Chonla Chanchu Bardu Dami Kyabsun Dagi Chushi Giban Dagi Dolan Benshi Sanji Drubarasho Sanji Chedan Tsojin Chonla Chanchu Bardu Dami Kyabsun Dagi Chushi Giban Dagi Dolan Benshi Sanji Drubarasho Sanji Chedan Tsojin Chonla Chanchu Bardu Dami Kyabsun Dagi Chushi Giban Dagi Dola Benshi Sanji Drubarasho Kanki Tuzini Zone Dawa Tumche Bambi Chere Tambi Chun Denze Kwadam Kela Chanse Lo Good morning everyone. Kanzu Zanyima Lojoni Muser Shudiguri Sra Dinza Lojoni Muser Nalolaya So Chanjuk Sem Ki Lense Chigda Teni Sherp Tombani Tobi Ta Sherp said Kanji Tabshi Nidi and number Sanji Chu Tinangita Table Chimbi Chugita Nyamne Yonamenadi Pigita Jonder Che Yonamenadi Tabshi Nidreshas Tichidita Tabki Kondo the Chanzan Chingan the Shu Sambache and Tatanen Inima and the Sheriff Court in Prodigores.
We've been looking at a text that is called Mind Training Like the Rays of the Sun. Now, looking at this practice of mind training, it consists of aspects of method and wisdom. In fact, when we look at the teachings of the Buddha, all of them can be summarized into these two aspects, the aspect of method and the aspect of wisdom. And so in the aspect of method, what we take up in our practice is the development of the mind of enlightenment, which is rooted in great compassion. And for the wisdom side, we have the development of wisdom that realizes emptiness. So whatever we do comes under the banner of these two, training in bodhicitta and training in bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, and training in wisdom, the wisdom of emptiness. So going back to the text, mind training like the rays of the sun. The text, first off, teaches the development of the method side, bodhicitta and all its associated branches. We've covered that, and now we're looking at a section of the text that explains the way to develop the wisdom of emptiness.
Odiri Dinza Habshini Sondrik the Yamandi Kichishich Sigoris Benaganzu Miziki Danjing by Naya Tabshini the Kichishich Chagoras Pap Kibuch Mena and Chizonalaba Droyalaya Yota and then Naminiam the Denaya and Yota Chickpit and Tab Kibuch dan so sem Chick Mena and Mini Dets of Jelaya Samba Muntumbani the Yong Barasra the Samba Muntumba di Pig Telia Tanlin Chimatuana and Yokta Chaya in Barwas Tinza Sosum singing the and so the Tanlin Chet Samlo Muntumba Tava Muntumba 좁은 멘트 벌려야 될래야 당린 제바이나 제투나 디 소비 냠렌다 약시 데레샤스 디 꼴직 송도 하스라
And so we need to combine method and wisdom. This is the most important element of our practice, to bring together the side of method, the side of wisdom, and to unite the two. So first off, with the method side, we need to develop skillful means. We need to become skillful. It is not only important in a Dharma practice to become skillful, but also when we look at our daily life in society or in a family unit, it's important to become skillful in our interactions with others. And becoming skillful also includes developing patience with each other. So if we don't have that in society in general, in our interaction with society, it is difficult. And also if we don't have that in a family unit, we have difficulties. So we need to have patience. Particularly, you can say that when you have two people joining together, forming a relationship, inevitably there would be different views, different ways of looking at things. There would be also different way of behaving or reacting to situations. So without developing a way of accepting that and working with that, there will be problems, there will be difficulties. And therefore, the best thing to practice on the method side is forbearance, is patience.
데레 디자 다딘디게 삼로 약부디 고향 그 삼로디 이게 용약이 시den도디 소디 아 셰럽싱 송고도 하스라 다 셰럽세디 피게 아 덴중그 덴바담 좀바 무연네스 카인바디 아니 땐라 파브퉁게 남주텔이야 셰럽싱도스 로 데다 무연네스 카인바지 똑똑바이나 아니 샘디 착당기 온 monro야 로 착당 초롱기 온 마송야 디 마송디 데니 아니 강 용바디 피기다지 강 종바디 아니 땡종코 용 초야지 용 외바지 임바지 통온디 데니 가서 또 당연히 지야디 레라부쇼 차고서레스.
And so we need to develop a way of thinking that reacts in a way that is calm, that is relaxed to different situation. And the foundation for that is wisdom, the development of wisdom. And wisdom is the capacity to distinguish between what is true and what is false, to determine this determination, what is real and what is not real, what is true, what is false. This determination is done by wisdom. The wisdom that realizes the way that things exist, the way they are. And so if we develop the wisdom that realizes reality, that understands the way that things exist, we will not be swayed by anger and attachment, those partial states of mind. So our mind is affected by partiality, the partiality of anger and attachment. But when we then develop wisdom, and particularly the wisdom that understands the way that things arise in dependence upon others, it understands dependent origination, then we can also see how things happen, how they occur, why we experience difficulties and so forth. And thereby it would be much easier to deal with situations, to accept what is happening, and also be able to work with it.
대장 배는 안줄라 게임 가르쳐 봐 있네요. 동린지 마투야지. 그러 배나 다 게임 만슈디 교드론디. 그러 교드로야 돼 게임지기 톤다. 교드로여라서 간 배나 아니 류 아니 컵드로야 아니 지비 아니 류려야 차고용돼야 그 참로고 아니 류 란신치 그러 류 코랑 란신치 임바디 임바 통와이나 데니고 딩교드론디 쇼지기 샘숑야다 아니지 소와 농부기야디 게제자다 용드로여서레 당간도 디 촐래야 로디 콤디 메디 아니 교화지 좀 디펜드 샘심 줘야 로 샘근나사 비게 용대도 아니 무유 네츠 마시비 왕키 용구여보다 더 시브리스 랍초가사레스라
When certain conditions are met and a situation arises, we often find ourselves not being able to deal with that situation, not being able to cope. Like, for example, when we look at our reaction to change, we often are incapable of really coping well with change. We can see that in relation to ourselves, for example, how discouraged we become when our body changes, when we age, when the body cannot remain straight anymore, when it starts bending over and so forth. We can see how our mind is made unhappy, becomes discouraged. And of course, this is the nature of the body. This is what happens to the body, but still a mind refusing to accept that process of change, we become discouraged, we experience mental anguish and so forth. They occur because of not understanding world reality and expecting things to stay as they are, whereas in fact, they go through a process of constant change.
데다 딘자 비기다 아 교원로에다 교와디 수 아니 찍찍이에 땐 용구여wanza 단 교와 약부 용야디야 규제 약부 망부지 소원디 교와 약부로야지 규제 비기 독자 망부지 소원디 아니 교와 독자로야지 다 딘치기 레원디 다 규제 토라야 상로탄 로 규제 비기 텐종 토라야 상로탄이 아니 무연네스 서당기 다 리바디 다 산지기 쇼낭기다 아니 labje yönevenen direshas ro direshas da di lo nidon tuger ro sarida tanda ina tagaran ro tagaran rema do telen gyor ro ja kanya mando asro di jinju kebo surajik somba ina ya di rigpa dilya gyor ro je yo mars kansu ko nguyo nesul tenla phavji gi nguyo nesul rigpa chada yanza di kadyu ina gyor ro musi wajre do asro.
And so things undergo a process of change, they transform when they exist in mutual dependency. And so when many positive cause and conditions come together, they produce their respective result, a positive result. Whereas when negative cause and conditions, a multitude of them comes together, they produce a negative result. And so when we develop an understanding of this level of dependent origination, dependent arising, in which causes and conditions come together, they produce their own respective result. And then we can understand better how things exist. And this is found within the teachings of the Buddha, given 2,600 years ago. And though they were given such a long time ago, still those teachings pertaining to reality have not changed. So in those teachings, we have a description of how things change in mutual dependency. Those sets of teachings haven't changed. And if you're skilled in thinking of those teachings, then you can see the reasons, which are the reasons or the logic, which is found in the Buddhist teachings, and understand the way that reality exists. So it's not that the reason have changed throughout the passage of time. The reasoning that the Buddha used 2,600 years ago and explained in that level of reality, that dependent level of reality, is still the same reason without undergoing any form of change.
다들이 간소 조 제자 셰럽 코르티 셰럽 능다 동반이 코르티 차그도 쓰라 이게 승zam으로도 길어서
Can I say some kind of?
이 승zam이
청소무수
주미께 우리 차세.
셰 원을 든데 데라 된다면
어디 다가나.
And so today we're going to go back to the text and pick up on the point that we left off in the previous session. So we're looking at a section that explains the development of wisdom. Now, as we're looking at mind training like the rays of the sun, let's just look at the verse. Sorry. Just a second. I had it in. Okay. So let's look at that. The way to maintain the view outside the meditation session is indicated by the line in between sessions. Be like a conjurer. Russell.
Reda Sherab gom ondi ani pigita gom gab kaptula rokta nyamba shaksirata ani gom nguju kaptula ya ani sem tetan chikta ani gom din zam shani ani ta chawa shemba chibi kaptula ya tunsum se diris hi kaptula ya ani samutanda ni sungora asra ta jetab ki kab se di pigi gom gyab savi jela ya ta kharnaji samtang warsandi gimi ki urchase tunzum su gimi ki urchase.
And so the section that says in between sessions, be like a conjurer, it refers to how we construct our spiritual practice. So we spend some time in doing formal meditation session, what we call meditative equipoise. And then we arise from that meditative equipoise into a period of time, which is called in Buddhist terminology, subsequent attainment. So here the text explains what to do in this particular period of time, in between sessions, in between meditation sessions, having a reason for meditating on emptiness. The type of attitude that we develop is like a conjurer.
Terda nyamja kawlaya pigi samtawandi manzu tseju chiwandi ta nga seti ra ani nga deva da nga dunga mundebi ta nga u nyambi ki ta lochi nga samalolaya shukchenbu chi ta yorwasra ta dii shicheni tani chakdan lochi tani ta dunga mambushu yongya di sungwa dinza nga u nyambi nga di ta ngunzin chiwandi ra anzu samololaya nga u samandi ki yu be round be dodoji yukorang tini chi yobatawaji chadeya di ani samlo din norshas kana yabu seju cheda nga di selni pi yultini tsawani ni mundus ro tilawandi ta yultini tsawani ni ta niki yoda metani ta cheba chingin ki lo telaya ta rishik los yultini trumatu chewandi ki yultini dindijilaya yoba di tsawani ni niki yo marsitara ta di kaguti ta nyamshasiro ta yudini tsawani ni tseni maniba tilaya ani lo teni gomya chik ta dini gomni ta zam shaawandigi ta yudini menaya yotsul chik yungo res tanyin yores nganzu dewa ani kibu chona ani dewa da magiba chona dunga di nganzu ngus nyungu yoyanza nga yores di ta yudini matruba inaya pigi ta yotsul di ta gyumata wajires wrong as big true and mean true mig lenny and true what they want to give and in Dramandach Shargo de Yene, Tangomalaya, you'll tell it Yomaras, the Dinashink race. The Jeta goes to tea some dangos, the Tanya Chesutelia, or Tanya Chesutela, some dangores.
And so in between sessions, when we act like a conjurer, the meaning of that is that we have to extend what we have meditated on while being in meditative equipoise to what happens when we arise from a meditative equipoise. So the point is that we begin with, first of all, understanding what is the type of meditation that we do while we meditate on emptiness in meditative equipoise. So what we deal with is, first of all, recognizing the sense of self that arises in our mind when we think that, for example, I want to be happy. I don't want to suffer. I want to have happiness. I don't want to have pain. So all of us have strong sense of self, me, I, that arises in our mind in certain situations when we experience happiness or suffering. And this strong sense of I that arises in our mind then gives rise to anger with respect to others, or attachment with respect to something else, right? So our mind is affected by anger and attachment in relation to that strong sense of I, self, that arises in our mind. And then when we start to examine the way that I, or me, appear to my mind, we see that it appears with this appearance as if there is an independent sense of I, an independent sense of me that exists completely objectively. And so we start to investigate the sense of self that arises in our mind, whether it indeed exists objectively, independently. Can I find that sense of self if I look for it? And so we use what we call a rational consciousness, a rational awareness that investigates whether, when I look for that sense of self, or when I look for I or me that appears to my mind with that sense of self, can I find it? And this rational analysis that we use in a meditative equipoise cannot find it. It cannot find an objectively existing I, an independently existing I. So this is what we do while we're in meditative equipoise, meditating on emptiness. And then we arise from that meditative equipoise into what we call subsequent attainment, or this period in between meditation sessions. And in that period, we understand that although I do not independently exist, I do not objectively exist, I still conventionally exist. Conventionally, when I experience something that I like, happiness arises in my mind. When I encounter something that I dislike, pain arises in my mind. So I exist, although I do not objectively exist. I exist, although I'm not an independently existing person. And therefore, this instruction that says in between sessions, be like a conjurer, it means that, for example, if you go to see a magic show or a conjurer, there might be different things that will appear to your eyes, but none of the things that appear to you exist in the way that they appear. So in between sessions, be like a conjurer means that there's a certain appearance that dawns to the mind as if you or other things exist objectively, independently in and of themselves, but they do not exist in this way.
Tilda dinza kasoda pi nga yudin ni matribu tsuldiya ani sem teni ro gom gyab tubayna kayo layo gi pendo ani maung ba pugyang rimbulaya ani pendo chenbu yongya chi chagores ro.
And so if we meditate on the absence of independent existence, of objective existence, we will reap a long-term benefit from that.
Tadi kadu gom gores ro tadi kadu gom gores lana nanzu gi lega khar cheba ina ya 소소 기부다 대부 용야지기 체도 다 야자 고추 고구 체그라다라 인자 곰갸야디야 박돈 곰갸야디 기부 용야기 체도 라 랑기 체도 아니 곰갸나 랑 기부 용야 생기 체도 곰갸나 기부 용야 간진 도르네 기부 용야기 체도 인자 마기비 갑둘라야 아니 박돈 아니 곰갸고야디 빼마스와 개체 모래샤스로 마기비 갑둘라야 간데스 곰고그레스 라운디 똥바니 곰네 마기비 갑둘라야 똥바니 간데스 곰 투그레 간데스 곰 고그레 세다 디오모무 레그라스로.
And so the next question is, when should I meditate on that? Well, first off, we recognize that whatever we do, whatever we undertake, we do things in order to be happy, to find happiness, to find comfort, to find well-being. Most of the things that we do are motivated by that wish for happiness and well-being. And so when we think of meditation, meditation is also done for the sake of developing happiness and well-being. So either for our own happiness or also for the happiness, the well-being of others. So we go through different periods in our life. There are periods in which we're happy, we are well, and periods in which we are unhappy, unwell, not well. So thinking that meditation is also used to make the mind happy, to make the mind well. Then also when the time in which our mind is unhappy, this is also a time for meditating, right? So if we think, how should I be meditating on that? When should I be meditating on that? Then also particularly when we are going through a rough patch, when our mind is unhappy, this is also a time to use such meditations on emptiness.
랭아도 파다나 미참을로 아니 파디 온디기 김도 카오라치라 기부janjan 요요라지다 소르그라 이네야 미질이야 강가리 맹이지 따요 말았다 메탁셔레도 왔으라 제 tinza ta kanga chebi kabdula ani nga kibu bundu samdebi kabdula ani pigi ta magi bi lodi chikbo shik ani sosu gyolaya ani magi bi lodi mado lo shamba yo marwasna Geshe yadam yo rasra manzu khari na samtan tuye lo yo inza nga kibu bundu sambe kabdulaya kibu megi ngadi 딱지 친 가위에 제약이 돌아야 상무당에 디게 마기비 갑툭 마기바 세약이 아니 탑럽 약슈식 야시야다마 인사레스라 미셴질 때는 세고 좀 빼깔하고 랑간 좀 미셴바질이야 자ገብ고 좀나 깔하고 변도스라 냠뇽 요라다 미셴바질 땡고 차유젤라 빼깔하고도 소수소수기 소수수 기부 소투야기 아니 탑시 니바나 다 약슈 디레샤스 약슈디 고물루 손을 열다 다니다긴 그 다니다기 자리세디 산지 손을 열에 오늘에도서라.
And so particularly when we look at, when we look at others around us, sometimes we have that feeling, that sense as if everything is working out so well for others. Everyone around us is so happy. But still, when we think about it, just like we ourselves, everyone goes through periods of difficulties or problems. Everyone have things that do not work well for them. Although sometimes we get that idea, that appearance as if everything is hunky-dory for everyone, but us, still all of us have problems and difficulties. So particularly when we on a personal level experience difficulties, and when we start to look at the appearances that dawn to our mind, it appears sometimes when we are unhappy that we are completely alone in that situation, and the only thing that exists for us at this period is that unhappy person that is we ourselves. And we find it very difficult to deal with this unhappy self or unhappy mind. And so rather than relying upon others to make us happy, to take away our unhappiness, then we can work on our mind, for example, in trying to identify that sense of unhappy person that appears to our mind as if that unhappy person exists independently, objectively, in and of themselves. Rather than expecting others to make us happy, we can make ourselves happy in seeing that when we look for that independently existing person that appears to my mind, particularly in those situations, I can't find it. Certainly, if we use such meditation techniques, Geshe reckons that you could find best of help in terms of uplifting the mind or changing one's perspective. And this is what one of the Indian scholars that we rely upon, Nagarjuna, said in one of his writings. He said that I'm my own protector, I'm my own savior. Who else is my savior? But also, I can be my own enemy. Who else would be my enemy?
데리다 어딘지게 나디 슈크쳔부 슈즈 낭데디 파세주 지온디 자원니니 비 zugutu사지 마라바이나 다라그 말이스 디팀 아니 디라그 매바디 세밍 예바닌 다좀는디 송인자 아니 디 진주기 땅 공부를 두고 쯧비 아니 남주친기 깨우당받다 딘디지 베르다고 마음부 배워야 콘 사마로기 비기 세니 자원니니 니기 매바디 베 가서다 리비 트로마지 몬솜도 떠체니 봐 뇽이 트브니 디 통디게 아니 생기 착단 걸로 참로 많이 바디 나나바 아니 팀 줘야디 군주 뇽이 트브니 당간줄에 람된 신자 간주 디 토라 슈지 잡아이나 야시 야단 받다 팬도 연구열에서
Particularly, Nagarjuna gave an advice about the way to use such meditations in his writing. He says that particularly when we have this strong appearance of I or me that appears to our mind. So in certain situations, there is a really strong sense of self that appears to the mind. Particularly in those situations, when you look for I or me in the way that it appears to your mind, you will not be able to find it. And when you develop certainty, when you ascertain that it cannot be found, as Nagarjuna said, you can then transform it to be an experiential knowledge of the absence of that sense of independent self. So first of all, we use a variety of reasons in order to investigate the appearance that dawns to our mind. We appear to our mind in those situations as if there is that objectively existing I, independently existing I. There are so many reasons that we can use in order to investigate that appearance and see that I cannot find a sense of self that appears to my mind in a certain way. But it's not that we only use reasons. There's a way also of then transforming that to be an experiential knowledge in which we directly see the absence of an independent self, in that all of our misconceptions then dissolve into this understanding of the absence of an independent self, and this is of great benefit.
그래 딘자 배는 안주기 자원니 니기 매바 치려야 아니 니기 여바 시샤진 비유딩 여바다고 라왕도 여바 시샤진 아니 니년다 니 지금 레스 라우진 아니 비기다 당진께서 mam부슈 수치 디 당진가 왕기 다도 손지 다도 손 투고요 말했어. 손 투고 뭐 쇼래. 간 배는 안수 소수 류디 아니 소수 비기다 아니 라완치니 다부잡 투고다 더 쇼래 지ren도서. 겐데요 말데 게로그레 신데요 말데 시로그레고 딘자 소수 류디 타치도 다도 손 투고 매바이나 아니 셴지 다도 손 관도 투고 말데 있는 안수 출치는라. 아니 델야 차신게 왕기 수조원데 가드이나 아니 참만디보다 마기바지다 강한 체대바디 연구여바디 당진 디왕기레스 디송라다 산점데 디송도 쓰라.
And although when we investigate our sense of self, we can see that it cannot be found when we look for it, when we look for that independent self, still we assume that an independent self does exist. This is how we respond to certain situations. So we take for we take it for granted, so to speak, or we assume that this sense of independence that exists, and we adhere to that, we cling to that, we grasp that so strongly. We have such a strong sense of self, and with that strong sense of self, we act in order to protect it. And the same thing also happens with, for example, our body. So our body appears to our mind as if there is an independent body. And on that basis, we act in order to protect, we act in order to protect the body. And yet the body cannot be protected, in a sense that inevitably it goes through a process of aging and dying and so forth. And although we cannot really prevent that process from occurring, we're still attempting to do it, to protect it as much as we can, with that strong sense of clinging and attachment, which is a mistaken awareness or mistaken consciousness. And that is an attitude that is making a mind unhappy.
그래서 다 유딘이 맞춰봤지, 라왕도 매대봤지. 다 라왕도 매대봤디. 피기다 리피 톤의 조원디게 아니 샹라 떼는 정도스 떼는 정도세 균센테라다 다 떼는 종이 균센기 라운드 매바 니비기 로디 또투비 남주디 셰르브레스 다 디기 로 만주 캡처서 연하면나더디 아니 남주 델이야 캡처너로 산지기 추는 거다 캡처서 연하면디 아니 떼는 종이 균센기 그 동바 니비 로디 동바 니비 로디다 아니 소수기 캡연면 데레스라 다 딘디치 샘라야 춘투바이나 디 로디 톱지 아니 동할 사말로 림지 아니 좀 투게지 연구연자 다 딘nem부 쇼진 송고레스 단디칼라
And so we use reasons in order to prove that things do not exist subjectively, that I do not exist subjectively, I do not exist independently. And when we use those reasons in order to prove that, we can then reach the conclusion that therefore I or other phenomena arise in dependence upon others. What realizes that is what we call wisdom. And this is our real refuge. This is a real protection. So when we think of what will give us protection from suffering, it will be the understanding that since things arise and depends upon others, they're empty. So if we develop that mind, at least as this section says, all suffering will abate.
시 된데 소는 된데 대단한 된도 장주기 샘공부 름바 덤바 체가와 침비송 상체 매보스
So then it says, just as a conjurer feels no attachment for the illusions he creates, a meditator after rising from meditation and emptiness has no attachment to appearances. This will be taught later. These are no more, no less than the techniques for meditating on the ultimate awakening mind, according to the words of the great teacher Chekawa.
좀 된 뒤기 땜빈 힘보 좀 된 뒤다 땜빈 힘보 동반이기 된 땜빈 힘보도 동반이래스 동반이 다 뒤된 장애기 송르 주츠 신지 말로가 땡라 패비 롱댐바 곰불루드 야스기 지수 차니 파파 다비 샤기 샹아니 다메비 된 땡라 파바니 갸요 곰바 신지 말로가 짜와 조침비 인지 셰디 동예 관계 도시는 대시셰비 롱딘지 슌이 댐바 쓰바이 로르로마 다라인 텔리기비 맹아기 슌이 댐바 또번길 시 셰바다 제수 톰바 뒤숨도 산지 탐지기 캐르 찍도 뒤비 다니 지준 잠비 엔지 넘버 2와 샬순가버 취이자비 셰바신 텔라파블라스.
And so we're now going to go into the section that explains the actual instructions on cultivating the ultimate awakening in mind, ultimate bodhicitta. And it reads, Buddha, the transcendent subduer, or the Bhagavan, prophesied that the protector Nagarjuna, his spiritual son Aryadeva, and the followers would establish the unmistaken, definitive, and interpretable meaning of emptiness as the essence of his teachings. Subsequently, Chandakirti established the meaning of selflessness. The great Lord Atisha concurred that he had faultlessly presented the intention of the conqueror, saying, "Who has realized emptiness? He who was prophesied by the one thus gone and saw the true reality, Nagarjuna disciple Chandakirti. By following the instructions derived from you, will realize the true reality." In accordance with the assertion and thought of the king of the doctrine, Tsongkhapa, emanation of the revered Lord Manjushri, in whom the wisdom and compassion of all the Buddhas of the three times is brought together as one, there are two main outlines to this section: recognizing what ignorance is and how it is the source of samsara, cyclic existence, and showing that in order to eradicate it, we need to determine the view of selflessness and also to have a technique for doing so, beginning with recognizing what ignorance is.
어디다 디나로야 따동 니 칸기 똑시나세 동바디 응은진 거라다 동바 응은진디 동세기 장원기 동바 라 장원기 동슬라원디 신라야 템바인자 신라 템니 요고바인자 아니 장원기 동스 라다디 아니 디추 탐젤야 난주직 미기 통야 나요코야 직비 류르레 세미네 코리아기 추 간다진바네 여비 추 간다진바네야 아니 라왕기 똥바디 레즈 다 라왕기 똥바 임바 디 똑투바이나 라 유딩니 마트바 라왕기 똥바 임바 똑투바이나 안간수 줄라야지 아니 착다 모습기 로 아니 신줄로 간 여바 디디 아니 에 가르도스 따라 디톡 가르도스 진짜 딘통고에 백케션 보내서 쓴 거다.
And so in this verse, Atisha says, "Who has realized emptiness?" So this word emptiness is a word of negation. While we negate is independent existence. Emptiness means something being empty of existing independently. And we use reasons in order to assert that that thing in question is empty of existing independently. It is empty of existing independently because it depends upon others. Because it depends upon others, it is empty of being independent. So that whatever we hear, whatever we see, whatever we touch, whatever we get, whatever we think of, all of those things that we interact with, all of them are empty of existing independently. And if we realize the absence of independent existence, all of our erroneous states of mind, anger, attachment, and ignorance, all of them will cease. This is a crucial point.
데르다 디지르다 동반이 아니 좀된 되게 송고야 균센 쪼디 단지 쉬어나제 다 대와 드비야다 동하세야기 대바 맹이지스다 숨지지에 매와인자 디 탑디 갈 두슬라운디 동반이 topic loти 토니 용군도스 다 딘지 로티 피 다 차다 모송 세야기 차다 모송 디다 원진치야디 개참부 차건자 아니 토모 마리 바세야디 다 원진치도 왔어 단데마.
And so this topic, emptiness, is important for us because all of us are wanting to cultivate happiness. We want to eliminate suffering. There's no one that does not wish for that. There's no one that is free from the thought, may I be happy, may I be free from suffering. And so if we want to accomplish our goal, it can be accomplished through emptiness. And so in order to do so, we need to dispel our anger and attachment and ignorance. And in order to dispel ignorance, we first of all need to understand what it is. We need to understand what anger, attachment, and ignorance are, beginning with ignorance. So this section, first of all, explains the way to identify, to recognize emptiness. The way to identify ignorance.
Terda the mariba ngusondi mariba ngusonshen di korwi tsawa tembas korwi tsawa temba te pomala dami jitawa tenla begushi tenla babi chulos.
First of all, it says ignorance, a lack of basic awareness, is diametrically opposed to awareness or to knowledge. It is not merely other than awareness, nor is the mere negation of awareness. It is the opposite factor that directly contradicts awareness.
Terdadi nanolaya mariba di korwi tsawares da korwi tsawa shibi korwa di da tesi malana kala kabudara.
Actually, I should have read through the following section, recognizing what ignorance is and how it is the source of cyclic existence. So when we begin with recognizing what ignorance is and how it is the source of cyclic existence, or what we call samsara, we also need to understand what samsara is.
Da korwas laundi Cheta sik delaya, that sik delay ni doji, Angara samna ni doji ngores. Chik di min sigresha, chik di chat sigreshas. Ra korwas, ra nganzu pombo di kaukalaya, pombo korwa resewa. Di kaukun korwa sadi min sigres. Ya korwas laundi, kora jabati. Di chat sig chagatus, ra. Ni yungutus.
And so in English, we use the term cyclic existence. In Sanskrit, cyclic existence is called samsara. When samsara was rendered into Tibetan language, it was given the term korwa. And the term korwa in Tibetan can be viewed in two different ways. It can act as a noun, but it can also be a verb. So when it acts as a noun, samsara being a noun, it is used in the following way. If you want to illustrate what samsara is, well, it is like this body that we have. This body is samsara. In that way, this body being samsara is a noun. But also, when we look at the meaning of samsara as being a verb, it gives you the sense of cycling, right? So going through a cycle or cycling.
Dinza the chatsik di zo di chatsik di reshasro. Kasna korwati bigi zawa maribe mumba gi shechene ani chagdan gaungi lesani ani kewalende yati. Kewalaya ugi pumbulaya ani minsen jowa sati. The did the di ro din korwa sati. And
so when the word samsara is used as a verb, or at least something that is associated with functionality, a certain action, a certain activity, it refers to the process by which we are under the control of ignorance, anger, attachment, and ignorance, then perform an action that causes us to then take a birth, arriving with a consciousness to the moment of conception. And the whole process is repeated in cycles, right? So being under the control of karma and afflictions, then taking a rebirth. This activity, this process is what we call samsara.
Ranganchi mebainza, ranganzu kia dan, ganzu shia ya, rang yorbe. So you know yomarasro. So you mebainza, ani that did dungareshas. Shawan tamjit dungais, said it that dungaresha.
And this samsaric process is what we call suffering. It is suffering on account of having no freedom, having no independence. Without control, without any sense of freedom, we are bound to take birth and then we die. We have no freedom to avoid death, although we wish to avoid it. As it is said in one scripture, having no control, having no independence is suffering.
The dinzada tasamla ya utaundi nganzu kewala ya rawa metakchu. Ani shela ya rawa metakchu. Yindi tsambala nganzu la ya rawa shushu kimado asira. Ta kerang la rawa yo marsila bayna. Nganzu long langar badara. Ina ya tendang ngoma samdang bayna. Nganzu la ya rawa mundo asira.
So then when we think about it, we have no control. We have no independence. In that we have no freedom. We have no control over birth. We have no control over death. And we can acknowledge that. Often if someone says that to us, we get upset. If someone says you have no freedom, you have no independence, it will make your mind upset. But then understanding our situation, and we have no freedom because we have no control over birth or death, we can understand our predicament.
Here's a dindigida rawa meba dia rawa meba dia rawa the trubachi mares. Laundi dia kenjila tene rawa meba kirvares. The ken kares laundi mari bada dechada sheda kanji dusu ton chigdu dinza manzu rawan chongeng so di chagda mozuli the di meba chsoya yorveslana the di din dugu sora da chomden dig sira da chomden dig tindigi ani kompande nyeba inza da di chomsheki ani rawan chongeng gi pigi ta chi ani dada masuna ngoma di mariba da chagda la so di ani meba songeng gi tab di ani sherab dinza pi che namji nelu ani rawan gi tribu tongwa de khona ni to bi sherab din banza ta di ani chomden dig ta chog nimbureshas ro chomden dig chog nimbu direshas.
And that state of having no independence also is not independent, in that it's not that independently we have no freedom. Having no control exists on account of being controlled by anger, attachment, and ignorance. So in a reverse order, because of ignorance, anger and attachment arise and they control our existence. So having no control doesn't exist independently. And so if we take the control, and that is done through eliminating ignorance, anger, and attachment, we can gain that sense of freedom or control over birth and death. And the thing that eliminates ignorance, anger, and attachment is wisdom. This is the essence of the teachings that the Buddha, the Bhagavan, gave. The way to develop wisdom that eliminates ignorance, attachment, and anger in order to gain control.
The dinza azu katsu sikipita sosu namju sherab di yagi tantubana ti tsegi ani mariba di nyong rogores ra mariba nyong rogore teletembigi chagdangi lo nyong rogore teletembigi ani sem di pheba di ma yungu yasara da direjta.
And so if we improve our ignorance, if we develop, if we take it from strength to strength, our ignorance will be reduced. If our ignorance is reduced, also anger and attachment will reduce. And the mind will be capable of dwelling in a sense of ease.
Tinza da dinding mariba di khares tambunis maribani rigbi mintu chos kyobayin las. Marigba pigi ta rigbi mendu chos kyo res laundi rigba de khare sherab di khare chön namgi nilu khayin ba di talking lodlea rigpas sheriffs tig mentu chores laundi chönam yudin matrupati chönam nelu la shani ta tig mentu chos laundi yudin tribal zimbi lodi marigwares.
And so looking at this section that explains what ignorance is, it says, ignorance or a lack of basic awareness. Now, we might have to work around this translation. The word for ignorance in Tibetan is marikpa, which means the opposite of knowledge or the opposite of cognition. So ignorance, a lack of basic knowledge or cognition, is diametrically opposed to knowledge, to awareness. It is not merely other than awareness or knowledge, nor it is the mere negation of knowledge. It is the opposing factor that directly contradicts awareness. What it means is that we have knowledge or cognition. What is directly opposite to that is a distorted view of how things exist. So what is opposite to knowledge, to awareness, is the apprehension of independent existence.
Redeya rigbat le shen samtang rigbat ka samji meba mentun cho mainshi rigbi ganda mentun cho was.
This awareness or knowledge itself should not be understood just as any sort of awareness and knowledge, but as the discriminating intelligence, wisdom that cognizes the meaning of selflessness.
That didn't see the should didn't tangle that rigbi ganda said hero kapdi lagorada pena sao the tamuni di kapdi rada nyamdu big shichi dendu native sauni yomarada.
So looking at the words that we use in this section, for example, saying that it is the opposing factor that directly contradicts knowledge or awareness. It's just like saying that, for example, heat and cold contradict each other, and that they cannot abide, they cannot remain in a certain basis without harming each other. So also wisdom and ignorance are diametrically, directly, you could say, contradictory.
Tinza the Karlaversadi, the Rangulaya, Rangi Semlaya, Mari Big Ganda, Mintuchos Churi, Rigba Yishidi, Sheriff Jitun to Wana, Mariba Ranshingi. Rosaja Shana traders the Kiamada, Tagan Lang Royach, Tagan Lang Royach, the Chagdosero, Pena, and it's how the Tamuniti, Piggy Tamu Yosadelia, Sao Shuchamko Shawana, Tamu di. Suggestion Roma, Tagarangi, Tagaran, Tagaran told about Lardra Nanshingi, Samlaya, any Jigba Yishidi, Sheriff the Tun to Wana, any Rangi Samla Yabigi, Mariba the Lardogres.
And so when we develop wisdom in our own mind, it will contradict our own ignorance, directly contradict ignorance. So it will be directly contradicted by the development of exalted wisdom. And when we develop exalted wisdom, it's not that we banish ignorance to another place. It's not that we remove it and send it something else. It is rather that once we develop wisdom, exalted wisdom, ignorance is stopped. It's just like saying that if you have a cold surface and you pour hot water on it, it's not that coldness is banished somewhere else. It's not that cold is transforming or transferring to a different location. It is the heat that eliminates cold. So similarly, when we develop wisdom awareness, it will completely eliminate ignorance. It's not that it's going to send it somewhere else.
Tadiri ta rigbang kaya ronga la mechayis. Rigba said it, Janganzu and Miku Tongore, Navi Dratugore, Ani Cheg, Pigironyungor, Tinzula, Rigba is the Yordane, did some the Shagmaris. Rigba did some the Shagmaris. Da meba topic, Sherapos.
And it says this awareness and knowledge itself should not be understood as just any sort of awareness, in that we can become aware of different things. You can become aware of sounds and visible forms and so forth. So this knowledge or awareness is not limited or taken to be just a general sense of knowledge. It is a very specific one. It is the knowledge or the discriminating intelligence that cognizes the meaning of selflessness.
Tinza Nanzuta, any Dungalia, Georgiaki, dress in the Mandu, any Pigita, Chisuta, Dungar Nara Chinging Kita, Nasa Yunjiki, took Sanamandu, D, any Mariba the Chagores. The D Karangi, Mebachik Sogu Yabana, then the Mebachik Sogu Yabana, and tap dame tobi sheriff di konare mado shembaji Geshe Gatambata and it tombacham den zambul lapen dalo ni ton trugas drover tirin la ya and namju put the chong dengi and it gave tambatu sene rayo marwasta nganzu raya meva di Geshe Gatamara the dinza the karan gugi mari wa the chadan la so se guyana and tombaningi tenlaya sanglo never the tango was nga chu kelengi inda me sasa yomarda kanji kibu gogoyona da onne tendo devaji gogoyona da maybe tende samlo stamatuna da shemba yomares da metachures da.
And so here when the text says that the discriminating intelligence that cognizes the meaning of selflessness is the opposite, the contradicting factor of ignorance, what it points to is that ignorance is the thing that connects us with suffering. It is what creates pain for us. It is like poison that seeps in and creates pain or suffering for us. So if we want to eliminate it once and for all, the only thing that can be done is to develop wisdom, the wisdom of selflessness. That is the only thing that can eliminate ignorance. The Buddha taught that 2,600 years ago, and there were many great scholars that came after the Buddha, and no one else found any other solution or remedy that can completely eliminate ignorance once and for all. A remedy that is other than the wisdom of emptiness. So what we need to do is to think of emptiness, of independent existence. And when we speak about we, it's not limited only to Buddhists, whether you're Buddhist or whether you follow another tradition or whether you're not any spiritual practitioner at all. If you are seeking to eliminate suffering, the way to do it is to develop the wisdom that understands reality, that understands selflessness.
Dinza tangoni nganzu shu gyasa rodi pigita sherab kiyak cheduta mezedi shu gyasa da di dire rota yimba inaya nganzu machine di ani kabdula yan tongde di kasota chi döyen madon tunguyo marasra da di mantong di tan döyen drbiya gi chedu ani kali mezi kansa kali telegyap ani penjur sa ro di chiwarda penjur kazu shukchir drobaina ani da kibu shu ke yungu yo marta di sami labde ajre dozra penjur tanda penjur ka shukchena lomba delaya ani chi pigi ko lakcha nyoya mar dro de chikro ko lakcha kazu mar drobaina tuzugi ani lomba di nyanga chenle kyudro yo ba di tanganzu tong de dozra o diri doj resta.
And so if we're really seeking happiness and well-being, we have to develop wisdom. So then when we think of what we're working hard on, what we're pushing to the development, to develop wisdom. But still, looking at how we go about with our daily life, it's not that we see the development of wisdom as the thing that will provide us with happiness and well-being. We directly choose to look at what appears to us right in front of our eyes, senses, objects of the senses. We pursue them for most of our life. We have that idea that if only we had enough money or wealth and so forth, then we could be happy. So we go to work, we work really hard, we accumulate possessions and money and so forth. And we have that idea that if we have all of those things, we can really be happy. And while we can get some pleasure or happiness out of them, still, it's not that this is the most stable sense of happiness that we can find. And this is actually quite clear when we look at our situation living in wealthy countries. So we can see that even in affluent societies or wealthy countries where people seems to have quite a lot of those objects of desire, objects of the senses, still they need to protect themselves. So there is a race for ammunition, for arming yourself in order to protect whatever you have. So it's not that the happiness or comfort that we seek through objects of the senses really gives us long-term happiness and well-being.
간지들다 다들 상황도 싸워 마리발이야 투고도 असरा 마리바 슈치 온디 베나 소즈 마제 간자 깔레 갸비샤 교기 점제저디 슈치 슈지 카드로에 바디야 안가서 통고 말아 따라 마리비왕기.
Because of ignorance, we don't really see what will provide us in our life with the long-term happiness and satisfaction or happiness, well-being. We cannot see that because of ignorance.
레딘자스 라 데베나 데니 다드 드론도바 인라스 마리바디기 다드 드론도바 다세디 비다 라왕 트바디 텔라네 칸자당 추기 다드 좀바 니소 대다기 미유 칸자당 추기 텐도 드론도비 잔당기 율니 칸자다 추기 다디 대한 담메 때나 파발라 가자 하장 캡체바당 캡충하다 트비스 선반이 메모롱기 양라데 가자 캡체와요나 체나 여바당 뎀바 여바 찍든지니 시티든도 뎀봉고바 켈렌시 고비 남자 체바는 데유 키비 루스 치비스 여바 세트를 좀 미시바 꾸니 뉴모다 남생기 땡레 탐지 총군 바시기 남자도 체지 대다 세무 트바라는 좀 미시바 대다니 뒤숨 산지 탐지 유저버지 빌람 시 따와 딱지 타다 잡아 땡라법이 된거만 냠슬람비 탑다 셔러야 맞아봐 손주도 검빈 데비네고스 주수꾼이다 간삭지기 진짜 마무신 독일라 오지라 도바타디비 수지 니네 코와치스 마동게 받으선도 기분치 제비 고니 숨지기 된체서 질름 제부꾼이 남자 남
So we spoke of ignorance, and the text says that being the case, ignorance is that which exaggerates phenomena, conceiving of them as being self-existent, which means that the particular type of ignorance that we are looking at here is ignorance of superimposition. It superimposes independent existence onto things. So it conceives of them as being self-existent. This involves two kinds of misconception of self, that of persons and that of phenomena. The object of these two are the object of the mode of exaggeration projected onto persons and phenomena, that is, the self of persons and the self of phenomena. In addition, the most vital factor in determining selflessness is to ascertain the extent of the object of negation, so that neither too little nor too much is negated. If the object of negation is too extensive, existence and true existence will be mingled together as one. And since we accept that the mental projection, true existence, is what is to be negated, when, according to the system of refuting true existence, we perform the action negation, we will not know how validly to establish existence. Instead, we will present everything, such as the defiled and pure aspects of dependent arising, in a distorted way.
단디님왕이 제시 슈금에 맞대스틱 로샤기 인스라 녀부베 다이나야 주 nengaro디 단지 콘도 슈데야디 디차고레스.
So this section is pretty long, and some of the words are complicated. There's this, here it says, when those who do not understand how to establish valid existence in their system engage in meditation on the established meaning of the view, free of the two extremes, the basis of the path traversed by the awakened ones of the three times, they will be gravely confused in their presentation of the entirety of the grounds, paths, and fruits. For the resultant point of meditation on the inseparability of wisdom and method, when the Dhammakaya, the truth body, and the form body, the Rupakaya, are actualized in one person's mind stream, having one nature, yet distinct, he or she will act to benefit sentient beings spontaneously and unremittingly until cyclic existence has been emptied.
캡처는 드다디 좀 된디기 추기 dom시 까스라완남 다시젬바 란디군 튀양스 최탐제 다메 집이 메규다 응원즈비세 년퇴되었다 추기다다 대가비 추기다미 남샤냐 메제버 다메 집이 dom기 퇴 간자게 다메 쌈다 대한 간자란게 집이 지기 동바 쌈는 제도 넘버 리버 쌈기 출마위 신다 첨부 다메 집이 dom기 퇴라 간자의 추기 다메 니는 아마는 년퇴되었다 인라 니번 존던 즈본 온타되어 추기다다 대동바 추기 다메 제도 오니메마 마왈라 파란 일에 란규번 남는 다메 집이 dom기 퇴 다메 니수 제바다 간자게 다메 기초 하마니단 다시 추기 다메니 또겐 바발레 로르키 추기 추가 마기비 엄비시반남 ngoboranz 나유도 제바 송비 또바 셴율라 만추바다 또멘 나유라 만추 원기샤비 란신남 란신 셰기 셰베 퐁금 겐체소 추기 텐도 메기옴 고규 다니 네메기 셰발라 남이 왕기 샤바 마임비 탱기 돌루데 대다까비 추기 다메든 제도 병하러방가시기 다메 집이 메기다 타두집이 리시기 제도든 제진 대단 타두집이 리시기 줘봐 디르물 굴수바탐 디샤자는 던지는 제니 타두집이 리시기 자자 요나 디 제도 요구 디요나 덴바 요바 소니 가식 타두집이 리시기 메지 마시 디요나 자베 가자 로번 교데 데터 디요나 리시기 제도 요구 디요나 덴바 요구 비체로 시세
So the following section explains different positions according to different Buddhist philosophy. Geshe said before that we just need to read through that before we get to the actual point that explains how to meditate on selflessness. So we're just going to read through a few passages. It says, if the object of negation is too narrow, although the principles of the four seals of Buddha's doctrine are unanimously acknowledged by all Buddhist traditions as being literally what was spoken when we set out to identify the self which do not exist, that is referred to by all seals, all phenomena have no self. We will see that the hearers, one Buddhist tradition, do not assert a self of phenomena as an object of negation, let alone the selfness resulting from its negation. So those hearers take the selflessness of the four seals to be the mere selflessness of the person, and that too as a person is being merely empty of being self-sufficient, substantially existent entity. Then we have other philosophies. It says, for those great pioneers who propounded the system of mere awareness, or in Sanskrit, the Chittamatra school, the mind-only school, the seal concerning the non-existence of self implies the selflessness of both persons and phenomena. With respect to the latter, the self of phenomena is the distinct identity of the objects and the perceiver. Consequently, they assert that the lack of such identity is the selfness of phenomena. The propounders of entitylessness, or the Madhyamika school, the middle way school, are of two types, the consequentialist and the inherence validators, or the autonomy school. For the autonomy school, the inherence validator, the seal stating the self is non-existence refers to the two selflessnesses. The approach to the selfness of person is the same as the preceding two schools, the mind-only and the two hearers traditions, the particularists, the Vaibhashika, and the Sutra followers, the Satantrika. With regards to the selfness of phenomena, since it is stated in the Blazes of Reasoning by Bhavi Viveka, the autonomy school's founder, Bhavi Viveka was the founder of the Madhyamika Svatantrika school, that as all sensory consciousnesses which, not being produced by fleeting or temporary causes of deception, take as their appearing objects things which exist due to their own characteristics, they assert inherent existence or existence due to its own characteristic posited by the force of non-conceptual thought, which is unmistaken with regards to its appearing object, and conceptual thoughts unmistaken with regards to their referent objects. Because of this, the self to be negated, or in other words, that which does not exist in all phenomena, such as the aggregates, elements, sources, and so forth, is that ultimate mode of existence which is not designated through the force of its appearance to an unmistaken consciousness. Consequently, negation of this is asserted to be the selfness of phenomena. Some earlier Tibetan masters asserted that the non-existent self referred to in the Buddhist seal, all phenomena are selfless, can bear analysis by an analytical awareness examining the ultimate mode of being, which means the same as to say that it is established by that analytical awareness, that it holds its own in the face of that analytical awareness, and that is the object of apprehension of that analytical awareness. There's so many words in that section. If something is the object of apprehension of an analytical awareness examining the ultimate, it must necessarily be able to bear analysis. If that were so, they assumed, it would have to be truly existent. Therefore, some say that it is not an object of awareness analyzing the ultimate, because if it were, there would be no basic object of negation. Thus, if it were an object of an analytical awareness examining the ultimate, it would have to bear analysis. And if so, they say it would have to be truly existent. Crystal clear, isn't it?
여기다 싸우면 간좀 몽고 말아서라. 그걸 가보지. 아니 비길 여행서다 간좀 몽도 왔다. 텔리아 성당 투고 말 샘때 투고 매반자 몽바로 왔다라. 디 리버 딤니로. 리버 딤니 로카시 찔지 장샤바이나. 야시야담바 아니 이 네버 마니나야. 아니 시부로 샘려야. 시부로 차이어다. 디 여바디다 냠용 여라서라.
Well, if it was not complicated, we would not have been confused or you can say unaware of this topic. So of course it is complicated, but also since it is complicated, it means that if we want to develop some understanding of it, then we have to put time and effort into the process. And if you stick with that for a long while, for a few years, then even if you don't realize it at the end, if you haven't become certain about some points, at least you can become clear about what the teachings say about selflessness, what selflessness is. So through giving it the time and effort, and understanding can be developed. So I'll give you the mic so that I won't have to repeat your questions. This is your time to shine. Go for it.
Hello. Thanks, Geshe. These questions, they might not get to the main point of the teaching, but I just had a couple of clarifications. So in the section on recognizing what ignorance is, the first sentence says ignorance or a lack of basic awareness is diametrically opposed to awareness. And I just wondered about this kind of, if there's any significance to the basic part of awareness there. When it says basic awareness, does that just mean basic in the sense that it concerns the awareness of the nature of the way things exist? And also just wanted to clarify, first it says ignorance or a lack of basic awareness is diametrically opposed to awareness. So are they slightly different things there? Because a lack of basic awareness is just the lack of that thing, whereas being diametrically opposed seems to be slightly different. So is this section actually describing just both of those being ignorance, and even though they might be slightly different? And the other question was, at the very beginning of the teaching, Geshe was mentioned impermanence in relation to mutual dependence. And I just wondered whether there could be some clarification around that. Is that referring to the mutual dependence between cause and result? Or is there some further explanation around that relationship?
Dila Kurana Chioni Yesa, Tambo dila Maripa Musung Shin la Di Kawatawa Tembala Sashtua, Tambo ni Marikpa ni Jekpe mi Tuncho su Yua in la Deya Jekpa le Shen Santang Sashtua. Jeza Inchigetola Chamboshina Rikpata Maripa de Dila Savo Shedagi Yomare Tedina. Chezan di Kab di la Rikpatan Marikpasea di Marikpasea di Rikpa Meba Samrebe Chezan di la Casa Mashiba Chiche Yamana Musu Gadachi Ripagi Musu Gadachi Yabadela Dila Niga Tengiorbe Yamena Ganda Chikbo Tengiores.
Ganda Chikbo Tengoras. The Jadan Sig did not see we should lose. Right, the Gurdang Tony Madam Sig did not see we should. Taya Rigbali Shan some slaundi, Rigba Mahim but some laya, Mari was Lavo Mares. Rigba Ka some laya, Lavio Mares. Rigbi mentioned Gandas laundi, Zandang was Galding. Rigba the Cardon were Dam Meba Tungoras. In the Mari body, doubt to Triban Zending, look, the digital shago is the Tilawarda.
And so here we have to work around the translation. The translation is a little bit, it's not too accurate, but often when we speak about ignorance, we speak about two types of ignorance. One of them is a lack of knowledge. And the second one is the one that is completely contradictory to how things exist, which means that it is an erroneous apprehension of reality. So here, when ignorance is explained, we don't deal with a lack of knowledge or a lack of understanding. So it says ignorance, or rather than a lack of basic awareness, ignorance or non-knowledge, not knowing, is diametrically opposed to knowing. Diametrically opposed, it means that it has a distorted apprehension of how things exist. So it is not just other than knowing or just not knowing. It is the opposing factor that directly contradicts awareness, which means that it is completely contrary to reality in its mode of apprehension. So this is the type of ignorance that we're dealing with here. So it's not just a lack of knowledge, not knowing something. It is particularly something that is opposite to a correct apprehension of reality. Di chiwa tambo dire.
Yeah.
Ani dingona bagachila karangi miktakpad se di peshi tendrit kasa toni tan tendrit dola sanota waina pena miktakpad se di chigi la temba chi sumba dila chizan chigi la temba se di la gyutang jebu dila chigi la temba shigirbe semane chigi la temba shambala shagiores.
다 메다바 세디 귤위 텐드레다스라 귤위 텐 귤와디 게임 만들어 소원디기 아니 귤어야지 메다비 텐다 조디 테레샤스라 게임 만들어 소원디 귤어야지 아주 까우까래야 메다바디 비기 아니 직줘야 직볼래야 매줘야 직볼래야 상당한데 직겨라디 디랑레만도스 Geshe chudi penanganzu lobjong lobjong yage tanya dia ku gyua tanya wanza kol ya ken sondi ken legbi ken sondi yage number thungu yoba o dus ninza ta metabi nesul di karteng dus la di bi tenjongi tsul di yagbu shoji yesam de ko ta tenjongi ani rang tomba yimba da dribya di ta Riba Yashi Rivas.
Maybe it's the cable going into the camera. On the other side, maybe. What is it? A battery? Okay. All right, so I can just use my since session is almost over. I can turn the doesn't really work. Anyway, so Geshe said that here when we are speaking of impermanence, we're talking about transformation. Now, transformation is enacted by many conditions. Many conditions come together, and therefore a process of change is enacted, and this is what we call impermanence. And we can see that in the different things that we do. For example, when we study a particular thing, we contribute to conditions for the development of our knowledge, studying. Many conditions come together, create a process of transformation. This is what we refer to by the word impermanence, which then highlights the dependency that things arise and depends upon others. Many conditions come together, they produce certain results. All right, so thank you. We will leave the session here for today. We will finish it off with dedicating all the merit that we've accumulated together in studying this section. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that is not arisen arise and grow, and may that which is arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. Several of the snowland teachings and transmigrated beings who makes extremely clear the path that is unification of emptiness and compassion. To the Lotus Holder Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You uphold the purest moral way, who serves in the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who mercifully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels. Several of myself and others, your disciples, please live long. Thank you.